I'd like to mute where he speaks. I didn't want to mix him up.
Good morning. My name is Priscilla Ocen, and I am the rapporteur for today's proceedings. Welcome to the hearings of the International Commission of Inquiry on Systemic Racist Police Violence against People of African Descent in the United States. These hearings are a process by which witnesses can present accounts of unjustified killings and maimings of Black people by police officers in the United States before an international panel of human rights experts. We now begin the hearing in the case of Jimmy Atchison. As I said, my name is Priscilla Ocen, and I am the rapporteur for this hearing. Presiding over today's hearing are Commissioners Hannibal Uwaifo of Nigeria and Commissioner Sir Clare Roberts of Antigua. The witnesses for today's hearing are Gerald Griggs, the attorney, and Jimmy Hill, Mr. Atchison's father. There will be 50 minutes for this hearing. Witnesses will testify, followed by a period of questions from commissioners. I will call time at the 30-minute mark and the 45-minute mark. Please excuse my interruptions. Commissioner Uwaifo and Commissioner Roberts, I now present to you our first witness, Mr. Gerald Griggs.
Good morning, gentlemen, and thank you, and gentlemen, ladies, for this opportunity to speak on the case of Jimmy Atchison. I plan on being brief, but I want to outline the facts of the case, and then I also want you guys to hear from the father of Jimmy Atchison, who we'll be discussing. And so a little bit brief background. We are in Atlanta, Georgia, which is one of the cradle of civil rights, and Jimmy Atchison's case underscores the need for expansive civil rights and human rights protections in Georgia. Basically, on January the 22nd, there was a young man who was gunned down, unarmed, in a closet as he was surrendering by members of the Federal Force and Atlanta Police Department. On that day, Mr. Jimmy Atchison was visiting his child's mother in an apartment complex off of Martin Luther King Jr. Drive in Allen Temple apartment complex. He was at that apartment complex where members of the Fugitive Task Force were commissioned to arrest him for an allegation of armed robbery. When the task force made contact with Mr. Atchison, a brief chase ensued where Mr. Atchison jumped out of a third-story window, ran around the back of the apartment complex, then went into another adjoining apartment where he hid unarmed in a closet. Members of the federal task force, particularly Atlanta police officer Sung Kim, gave chase to Mr. Atchison, surrounded him, and then ultimately executed him in a closet while he was on his knees with his hands up. This particular case received little to no notoriety initially, but then because of the efforts of Mr. Atchison's family and Mr. Atchison's Tanya Miller, as well as the NAACP and activists like myself, as well as the attorneys, began to give voice to this case. What we found out was that the allegation of armed robbery was based on a warrant that was not thoroughly investigated. We were able to track down the witness to the alleged armed robbery, and it turned out there was in fact no armed robbery. We tried to make contact with the district attorney's office. We tried to make contact with the mayor's office. We tried to make sure that all of the facts and circumstances surrounding Mr. Atchison's death would come full circle. We have been unsuccessful. But the facts as we know them at this point would be that Mr. Atchison at no point posed a threat of any imminent harm or danger to the Atlanta Police Department or the federal task force. That members of the federal task force were not equipped with body-worn cameras, which would have captured the entire scene. Subsequently, the officer alleged to have killed Mr. Atchison has been relieved of duty by the Atlanta Police Department, but he was allowed to resign in lieu of being terminated by the former police chief, Erica Shields. As the case stands to this day, we just celebrated the 2-year anniversary of the passing of Mr. Atchison. The family has been resolute in demanding justice. They have taken every affirmative step that they possibly could. They've spoken with 2 U.S. attorneys, John Horn and the former U.S. attorney, B.J. Pak, about civil rights violations committed by the Atlanta Police Department, as well as the Fugitive Task Force and this particular officer, Sung Kim. They have been unsuccessful to this point in receiving any type of civil rights investigation or any charges against this officer. They've also been in direct contact with the Fulton County District Attorney, Paul Howard, and now the new Fulton County District Attorney, Fonnie Willis, and we fully expect that charges will be filed against Sung Kim. But this underscores a serious systemic problem in America, a serious systemic problem in Georgia, and a serious systemic problem in Atlanta, Georgia. Mr. Atchison is just one of 18 open police-involved shooting cases in the city of Atlanta that have gone unresolved. More facts would be that Mr. Atchison, at the time of his death, was a father of 2 children. He was 21 years old. He had a son and a daughter. His son was about 8 months old at the time of his killing, and his daughter was about 3 years old. They will now grow up without a father. They will grow up without a parental guidance that only a father can bring. He also is a brother. He has another brother, and I believe he has 8 female siblings of a very large family that is very caring. And the reason why this case is important and it needs to be underscored on the international stage is that there has been a obstruction on behalf of the Atlanta Police Department. It took 9 months for this case to even receive any adequate attention. And that was after activists, as well as the Atchison family, had to go to 2 different town hall meetings from the mayor, Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, and try to get her attention. And it was only right before the second town hall that the Atchison family was able to secure a meeting with Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms to address this situation. This was the first time she had spoken to them with regards to the death of their son, and did offer her condolences and did make certain pledges of transparency and accountability, none of which have been met to date. That meeting was well over a year and a half ago. So the facts as we know, Jimmy Atchison was unarmed. He had not committed any crime. He was merely alleged to have committed a crime, which we later determined was in fact false by interviewing the witness that was present. That witness was actually mentioned in the police report about this alleged armed robbery. And once we interviewed that witness, she made it abundantly clear that she had told the police department about the alleged incident, and that in fact no armed robbery had occurred. Mr. Atchison was in fear of his life, which is why he ran from the police. He was ultimately cornered in another adjacent apartment and attempting to give up when he was given 2 conflicting orders. One was not to move, and the other was to come out of the apartment, at which point he began to surrender and was shot right under his eye, point blank, which was the shot that ultimately took his life. Since that day, there has been absolutely no accountability by anyone involved in the shooting and killing of Jimmy Atchison. There has been denial after denial after denial, which has caused the family to now have filed a civil rights lawsuit to get to the bottom of what happened to their son and to also get accountability for his unlawful killing. There has still been no criminal charges filed against anyone for the killing of Jimmy Atchison. And again, this underscores the systemic bias, the systemic lack of investigation that is continuing to occur in this country unchecked by unlawful extrajudicial killings by police officers. I am an attorney. I've been an attorney for 16 years, primarily practicing in the area of civil rights and criminal defense. And I can say under American law, under Georgia law, even if Mr. Atchison was in fact guilty of an armed robbery, the punishment for the commission of an armed robbery is not instant execution, unarmed in a closet. And so what we're asking is that this commission convene an independent investigation into all of these cases and bring light to the injustices that continue to happen in America unchecked. It was underscored by George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Rayshard Brooks, but Jimmy Atchison happened a year before all of those incidents, and it just continues to underscore the problem that we have here in the United States. Since Mr. Atchison's death, the FBI has now instituted a policy where members of their task force are now ordered to wear body cameras. The Atlanta Police Department officer, Sung Kim, was not allowed to wear a body cam while serving on the FBI task force. Thus, we don't have any body cam. Since then, the Atlanta Police Department has divested its participation in the fugitive task force because of the lack of body-worn cameras, which is a policy of Atlanta Police. But that's simply not enough. We need full liability and accountability for the unlawful killing of Jimmy Atchison and real justice and accountability in cases like this one and others. That will conclude my presentation. Those are the facts as we know them in this particular case. And I would call for his father, Jimmy Hill, to make his victim impact statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Griggs. Commissioners Uwaifo and Roberts, I now present to you our second witness, Jimmy Hill. Mr. Hill, can you please confirm your name?
Yes, Jimmy Hill.
And do you promise that your testimony to the Commission of Inquiry will be true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes, I do.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hill, you may begin.
January the 22nd, 2019, I received a phone call from Jimmy's mother, Cynthia Atchison, and she spoke to me and she said the police has, we called him LJ, they had Jimmy surrounded, and the first thing I thought about was, years ago, I've been a part of police brutality, and I know what they'll do, and I know what they're capable of doing. And when she told me, I swear, at least they didn't, she said they shot him, and I swear, at least they didn't kill him. She called me back 2 minutes later and said he's dead. January the 27th, 2019 was one of the darkest days of my life. Was one of the darkest days of our family life. My son Jimmy was unarmed, surrendering, and yet she trusted those who were supposed to protect him. And Song Kim took his life. Now a mother without a son, children without their father, our family without Jimmy, who we love and miss today so much. Jimmy's future was stolen from him. It was ripped from him. We will continue to fight. Our family has been through hell on this journey of trying to get justice. And we're not gonna stop fighting. With Atlanta Mayor Keisha Bottoms and other Atlanta officials who wanted this case swept under the rug, and who has played many political games in trying to stop us, in trying to deter us from receiving justice. But we're gonna continue to fight with other advocates and activists and friends. Our family has been through so much. pain, and we continue to carry the scars each day of Jimmy on our hearts and our minds and our souls. We miss him so much. Jimmy was aspiring to be a musician. He loved to rap, but he didn't do the type of hardcore rap. He wanted the type of rap music he did was try to get people involved and people dancing and people full of laughter and stuff. My son Jimmy Atchison life matter to many, to Atlanta officials, Atlanta Mayor Keisha Bottoms, and many Atlanta officials. They showed that his life didn't matter. What I can't understand about this case is why wasn't a SWAT called in a situation like this, as it has been in many cases. Sean Kim has always been known as an overly aggressive officer. If you were to look up his record, you will see how overly aggressive he has been in cases. At one time, even firing shots while officers was in plain view and hurting some officers in this case. Sean Kim took matters. He placed himself above the law, took matters into his very own hand, and became my son, Jimmy, Judge Jury Executioner. Sean Kim knew what he was going to do that morning. He knew his intention was to kill Jimmy. We knew my son didn't have a gun. We knew my son didn't do no type of armed robbery. Our family knew it, but we can't understand why they didn't take Jimmy in alive. And I think so much as Atlanta has been trying to protect, Atlanta has a police brutality problem, and they had been trying to protect and sweep this case under the rug because from the very beginning, there are casualties of mishandling the warrant, of not checking out the warrant, and they sloppiness. They're trying to cover up for their mistake. My son was a young Black man, and he deserved better. He didn't deserve to die in this type of manner. Many members of our family, his sisters and his brothers, it took them a while to finally come to terms that Jimmy was dead. Sometimes you want to wake up and think about it like this is a dream, only to find out that it's real. So many tears, enough tears to fill up an ocean. It took some, and I think some of us, somehow, some of his brothers and sisters still need counseling today because it still affects them in a way. Some won't go to his grave. Some don't want to really be involved with this case because it's too painful for them, because we're a close-knit family. My son, Jimmy Atchison, life matters. I hope you're able to come to a conclusion of doing the right thing, because Sean Kim need to be indicted and convicted of murder. Let me just say this quote here. And as Attorney Griggs spoke, here we are, the birthplace of Dr. Martin Luther King, who spoke strongly against police brutality and racism. And Dr. King said, we cannot be satisfied as Black Americans as long as Black Americans continue to be the victims of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality. Everybody should have the right to live their lives free of fear. Everyone should be treated with dignity and respect. Where is the dignity and respect when it came to my son, Jimmy Atchison? Sean Kim had an oath, a sworn oath, and his oath was, that he would have the courage to hold himself and others accountable for their actions. Who is liberty and justice really for? It is only for a selected few. It's liberty and justice for my son, Jimmy Atchison. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your very compelling and moving testimony, Mr. Hill. I want to extend to you my deepest condolences on the loss of your son, Jimmy Atchison. I now want to turn it over to our commissioners, Commissioners Uwaifo and Commissioner Roberts. I invite you to ask any questions that you wish to our witnesses. Mr. Griggs, the attorney in this matter, and Mr. Hill, Jimmy Atchison's father.
Well, thank you very much, Priscilla. Let me join you to commiserate with Mr. Jimmy Hill and the family of Jimmy Atchison for the loss. I am particularly very worried coming from the African background because as an activist in international criminal law and looking at what obtains here within Africa, which we have traveled widely around, especially Nigeria, the case of the United States seems to be the case of teacher, do what I say, not what I do. You know, because some of these issues have become so endemic and serious that what we see in Africa appears to just be a child's play. I'm really very, very shocked and disappointed at all I've been hearing, all I've been reading since this hearing began. Now, I want to start by asking the question. Is there a law in the United States that you arrest a person before investigating the case? If an allegation had been laid against the person of the late Mr. Atchison, is it the law in the United States for the police or for the FBI to go with guns and weapons after the man before investigating? Because what I've heard from Attorney Griggs right now is that thorough investigation in the absence of responsibility by the authorities, by the FBI, by the APD, in the absence of any responsibility, in the absence of any fair investigation. They've gone out to investigate and found out that, in fact, Mr. Atchison was not in fact involved in any robbery. Should that not have been the first thing the authorities should have done before embarking with weapons, with state power to go after an innocent man? I'm a bit worried. Is the US law different? Because elementary law teaches us, and I'm beginning to get worried, I'm beginning to accept clearly and fully that this is actually a systematic and endemic way of life in the US by the authorities. It's not a way of life. It's not something that is now, nobody does anything about it. The authorities do nothing about it. What they simply do is the victims go to court on civil matters, get some compensation, they pay, they go about again, do the same thing, continuing. How long is this going to continue? Do the laws in the United States not protect its citizens? Are we going to conclude that, yes, there are actually two laws in the US, one for the Black or the colored people and one for the white? Because we've had cases here during this hearing where the police literally, without effortlessly, were able to apprehend a killer of two innocent victims without firing a shot. Why fire a shot at a man in the closet? Is it a law that you shoot before you think? I'm just, because we don't even have this type of cases in Africa. And then of course we see some other cases which have gone through, which are similar to this, which are very, 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 very sad. I'm so sorry, but I'm beginning to wonder. 2 years, no investigation, no liability. The police is looking for, the police cannot investigate that. Even in Nigeria, where I come from, no matter how bad the cases, no matter how bad the military government was, once there is a death of this nature committed by anyone, the first thing to be done is investigation. Whether it is being done fairly or unfairly, but at least there should be an investigation. So I'm thoroughly embarrassed by all this, and I feel so sad that we have to continue to suffer these losses over and over and over again. And I think it's time we need to find a solution. I don't know whether police reform will actually work. That's what we're undertaking in Nigeria presently. Police reform, how it's going to work, I don't know. Or do we create, I suggest, a minimum standard for police enforcement? I do recognize that the US is a federal state that has a county police, state police, but police is policing. Anybody can be in any state. Is it not possible? I'm referring now to Attorney Griggs to have a uniform police code in 9 states, for which all policemen should be held accountable. Thank you.
And thank you for that question. And simply put, I believe, based on US constitutional law, as well as the law of the state of Georgia, that it's clear that you should investigate before you charge. And so in this particular case, you had one officer who went to a magistrate court judge and told the judge one set of facts that he had not thoroughly vetted. If they had simply looked at the police reports, which we have copies of the police reports about the alleged armed robbery, the witness is in the police report. It's like a 3-line police report, and they didn't fully get everything that the witness would say, but they did in the one line say the witness said that Jimmy Atchison did not possess a gun and did not take those items. So it was a lack of investigation. And then they went and got a task based on the lack of investigation to implement this felony stop. And for a felony arrest, you can use a certain amount of force, but you can't use deadly force until your life is threatened. That's the law in America. But it just seems like, as you said, there are 2 separate implementations of the law, one for majority citizens and another for minority citizens. And that's the underlying problem. And too much leeway is given to police. There is a constitutional case, Graham versus Connor, which institutes a reasonableness standard. It's the standard of a reasonable officer in that similar situation and how they would respond. It's a 1980 court case, as well as Tennessee versus Garner, which is another US Supreme Court case that gives the police this wide latitude. But it seems like the latitude is only exercised in cases where African Americans to be the victims. So I do agree with you. There can be a standard established in the United States that is universal to all policing, but our Congress does not have the will to take up this issue. The George Floyd policing reform bill is currently sitting in the Senate, and it will deal with these issues. The first issue that has to be addressed is sovereign and qualified immunity, which prevents families like Mr. Atchison's from getting compensation for the violation of constitutional rights. But then there's also protections in state law, because many of these cases are state laws that give immunity for law enforcement for these killings. So there are 2 principles of law that have to be revisited. But it seems like our government does not have the will, because the people that are being killed appear to be the wrong complexion for protection. And so, yes, you are right. There is a systemic issue. It goes all the way back to the fact that police have not been reformed. Policing has not been reformed in America since the 40s. And so we have to address these issues. It starts with cases like this. It starts with international agencies and other countries calling out America on its lack of human rights, its lack of implementation of civil rights. And so I agree with you. And I can think of several things that can be done, but our elected officials have to have the will and the courage to do them.
Very much, Commissioner Uwaifo. Commissioner Roberts.
Thank you very much. I also would like to say how sorry I feel about the killing, and to offer my condolences to Mr. Hill and his family on the death of his son. I wanted to ask some questions. One, I noticed in the complaint, the civil complaint, that there were many instances of police brutality being complained of against many of the officers. Yet it would appear that nothing came of this. So I'd like to ask Mr. Griggs, what became of all these complaints? That is one aspect. Is there an independent citizen complaint mechanism that should be dealing with these complaints? The other aspect that is of concern is the unaccountability, the impunity with which these instances of excessive force and unnecessary force can take place, and no one is found accountable. You mentioned, Mr. Griggs, in your presentation that there were 18 police killings, if I understood. I take it this is against Black people, that, or just police killings generally. If it's general, how many were Black or people of African descent in these? The last area, I hope I'm not overburdening you. The last area is with training. What sort of training does the police get? Is there a human rights element in the training program? Is there sensitization? Is there any psychological analysis of these people being recruited to be policemen? Yeah.
Before you respond, Mr. Griggs, let me just note that we are about 30 minutes into this hearing. I will give us another reminder of our time in about 15 minutes. There are a number of questions that were posed by Commissioner Roberts. I'll just remind you, Mr. Griggs, especially since I just interrupted. One is there a pattern or practice investigation of these officers given the number of complaints that were on record prior to the death of Mr. Atchison? How is it that there is such wholesale impunity where no one is held accountable? What kind of legal standards are in place that permit such impunity by police officers who kill residents, particularly people of African descent? You gave a statistic of that there are 18 cases open. Do you know the racial breakdown? How many are Black? And then lastly, the question of training. How are police recruited? Does the training include any elements of human rights? And are there any examination of the psychological profile of officers? Commissioner Roberts, I hope I summarized your questions accurately. And if so, I'll turn it over. Thank you. I'll turn it over to Mr. Griggs for a response. And Mr. Hill, I'll ask you if you have anything that you'd like to add after Mr. Griggs responds.
Okay, and thank you, Commissioner Roberts, for those questions, and thank you for reiterating the questions. That I was trying to keep track of the questions. So I'll take your last question first. Is there any element of civil rights and human rights training for law enforcement? As far as I can tell, there's an attempt. Clearly, by the numbers, it's not having the effect that it needs to have. In Georgia, we have the POST, which is the Georgia Peace Officer Standards and Training. They are revamping that training, but there are still no mandates in Georgia law or in federal law with a view towards human rights and civil rights training, which is another issue that's brought up in the George Floyd police reform bill. So that is an open question as to the efficacy of the training. With regard to the numbers, the 18 cases, those are all African American. Those are cases in the city of Atlanta, Fulton County. The only agency that tracks police-involved shootings in America is currently the Washington Post, as well as in Georgia, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. So from 2015 to 2019, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution in an article said there were over 150 police-involved killings in Georgia. And so I don't know all of the racial breakdown, but I do know those 18 cases in Atlanta, Fulton County are all African Americans. Last year, there was a report by, I believe it was the Washington Post, that said there were 996 police-involved shootings that ended in a death in America. So those are the numbers, but again, we're getting them from media outlets because the FBI does not track use of force killings, nor does the GBI, which is the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. So we don't have an outside agency that's tracking this. And then to go to your second question about accountability and anyone holding these individuals accountable, the question and the answer is absolutely not, because it continues to happen. And the reason why it continues to happen is the unwillingness of elected officials to divest the peculiar relationship between law enforcement and the prosecutors and the judges. Because for the most part in the criminal system, you have the law enforcement bringing the cases to the prosecutor and ultimately to the judge. So there is a peculiar relationship there. Not so much so with the bench, but more so with the prosecutor, that they don't want to disrupt that relationship and cause their other cases to drag, because police feel like they're being held accountable, so they don't want to help the prosecutor to deal with crime. And we're seeing a little bit of that in Atlanta with the backlash to the protests. They had the blue flu where officers called out because 2 officers were held accountable for the killing of Rayshard Brooks. And so that's one of the main issues. And then to your first question, is there some type of citizens review panel? In Atlanta, yes, there is a citizens review panel. It's called the Atlanta Citizens Review Board, but they have very limited power. They can make recommendations. They just got subpoena power, but they cannot make determinations on whether to hire and fire. That is solely in the purview of the Atlanta police chief, and the police chief answers only to the mayor. Same thing with statewide, there is no citizens review board. So we really don't know the scope and breadth of all of these issues. And it goes back to those 2 cases that I highlighted. The Supreme Court has given great deference and latitude to law enforcement officers because of the dangerous nature of their job. But it just seems like that nature of that job is not as dangerous in certain communities, but it seems to be super dangerous in other communities. I'll give you a perfect example. Mr. Atchison was shot while he was unarmed in a closet, given up for an allegation that turned out to be unfounded, while we had armed insurrectionists running through the Capitol and police officers helping them down the stairs and letting them go back home. So you see the double standard, and it hurts my heart as an officer of the court, as an attorney, to have to say this, but yes, there are 2 justice systems in America, and we have to fix that problem. It's time for the attorneys and the judges, that third branch of government, that third co-equal branch, to hold these individuals accountable. And it starts with charging and convicting officers that violate the public trust. There are laws on the books in this state, as well as in the United States, that address these issues. But if you don't have U.S. attorneys or district attorneys or attorney generals that will charge these individuals and ultimately let a jury make the determination of their guilt or innocence, you're going to continue to have police officers act as executioners on the side of the road.
Thank you. Mr. Hill, would you like to respond to any of the questions that were posed by Commissioner Roberts or Commissioner Uwaifo before?
Okay, yes. I have to, before we leave the broadcast, I have to thank God for giving our family, guiding us, giving us strength and giving us peace as we made it this far, because without him, I know we couldn't have made it. And I had to pay my respects to Jimmy Atchison's grandmother, Elizabeth Atchison, who loved him very much and he loved very much. She passed away. She held on long as she could. She passed away a day after our 2nd anniversary of the death of Jimmy Atchison, and she's truly being missed. Let's not forget, Son Kim was a 26-year veteran of Atlanta Police Force, a 26-year veteran. Also, I want to add, on February the 13th, 2019, 22 days after my son Jimmy Atchison was murdered, Frank Roach, a white American dentist in Brookhaven, Georgia, had a 10-hour standoff with police. in which SWAT was called, the proper procedure, SWAT was called. They sent a robot in to go room by room. They flashbangs and tear gas. And when they entered, there was an arrest warrant for shooting at his girlfriend. They went to serve arrest warrant. And when they entered the room, there was a tussle with Frank Rowe. He was in a small room like my son, Jimmy Atchison. And an arsenal of guns were found. And according to the DeKalb County Major Police, they brought him out without a scratch. It were 3 officers in a room, along with Sean Ken with my son, Jimmy Atchison. He surrendered. And what I'm saying is police always, after they kill, they want to hide behind their badge and tell that famous lie, I fear for my life. 3 officers, all 4 officers had guns drawn. Why only 1 shot? And everybody know, if these officers fear for Sean Kim's life, or they fear for their lives, with their weapons already drawn, my son will have so many bullet holes in him that you wouldn't have been able to count. So I can't understand why, as long and when Paul Howard was in office, and much pressure we put on Atlanta Mayor Keisha Bottoms to let Paul Howard, she kept continuing to block Paul Howard, the officers to be interviewed by Paul Howard because they had conflicting statements. And one more thing I just want to say. Atlanta police used to deal with armed robbers, murderers, and everything. Why was there 11 Atlanta police officers and only a couple of federal officers? What was the reason to get the feds involved? Why was the real reason? Was it just to get a license to kill, or the pressure and the level of intensity up? My son, Jimmy Atchison, I'm not gonna say Jimmy was perfect, but I know Jimmy didn't do this, and Jimmy didn't deserve to die in this type of manner.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hill. We have about 8 minutes left in the hearing, so I just wanted to remind everyone that we will conclude at 7:50 here, and that would be 10:50 on East Coast. So we have about 8 more minutes, so we have a little bit more time for questions. So once again, I'll go to Commissioners Uwaifo and Commissioners Roberts if you have any additional questions you'd like to pose to our witnesses.
Thank you very much. I just got a little bit of questions, because I'm not trying to be divisive or try to be racist or something of that nature. But I want to find out what has been the reaction of the Black population that has been in the police force in the United States. You know, because when we have a situation like this, from what I have seen and from what I have observed, it's more like more like a plan. You know, you go out, once it's black, you're free to do what you like, and then it continues on and on and on. But blacks, those of them who have colored people, what has been their reaction? Because when you have a group of people working together, I suppose every policeman in the United States or in different police divisions are not all white or people of that nature. They are also blacks. And we believe that as you flock together over time, there should be a kind of reaction coming from them to say, hey guys, why are these things happening and happening and happening? To such a level as to probably start pricking the conscience of their fellow white police officers. I'm not in the US, although I visit US once in a while, but I'm not in the position to know what has been Mr. Jimmy Hill, Gerald Grigges. I just want to find out what's been the typical reaction of the blacks who are in uniform. Are they very comfortable with this? Have there been any complaint? Do they have a union? Do they have advice for the Black community? Because this is a very serious problem that must be solved in one way or the other. We must get to the bottom of this. And the United States must be true to its creed and must be held accountable to its name and to what it preaches. I just thought I should ask this question. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you, Greg.
Commissioner. And before you respond, Mr. Griggs, I just want to give Commissioner Roberts an opportunity to also pose a question, and then I'll turn it over to you both to respond.
Thank you. Very quickly, Mr. Griggs and Mr. Hill, if he wishes, what would be your sort of your wish list of recommendations, your wishes of measures that would get to the root of the racism in the police department, which result in these discriminatory killings?
Thank you very much, Commissioner. So the two questions, one from Commissioner Uwaifo, is what's the reaction of Black police officers across the country to this raft of police killings of unarmed Black people across the country? And then the second from Commissioner Roberts is, if you could, if you had a magic wand, what kind of recommendations would you institute? What kind of changes would you make? So I'll turn it over to Mr. Griggs and then Mr. Hill.
Okay, and thank you for both of those questions. And the response has been mixed. I've had the opportunity to meet with members of NOBLE, that's the African American Police Union, National Police Union. It's the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives. And sometimes they've given voice to this issue, but for the most part, they've been silent. And many of the Black officers stand behind the blue wall. And they talk about this not being a systemic problem and that it's a few bad apples. But we all know that a few bad apples spoil the bunch. So we would like for our brothers and sisters in the blue that happen to be Black to start upholding their oath to protect and defend the Constitution and to implement the laws against their brothers in blue as well. There does not need to be a separate system of justice. So there's not been enough outcry. They try to do outreach in the community to not talk about the problem, but talk about other things. But the problem is systemic and they need to address it. And they need to realize that 24/7 and only blue for 8 hours. And then the second question that you asked about if I had a magic wand, I think, and one of the members in the chat said this as well, we have to recognize the original sin in America, and that is African chattel slavery. And we have to remember the origin of policing in America. They came from slave catchers. So we have to realize that we have to reform or reimagine it from its core inception and root out the systemic racist policies that are embedded in law enforcement. So if I had a magic wand, one, there would be an indictment against the United States of America for the continued systemic racism and systemic oppression of people of color, particularly African Americans in this country. And two, the imagining of what public safety and policing could look like in communities of color, allowing the community to drive the conversation. We're done hearing from police officers. They have proven that they cannot do this in a way that reflects the will and the beliefs of the community. It's time for the community to determine what public safety should look like. So again, an indictment against the United States for this repeated systemic racism and police brutality, and two, a reimagining from a public perspective of community public safety are the things that I would request happening. And then of course, police accountability. These officers that commit crimes against citizens should be held accountable and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law.
We have about 1 minute left. And with that, I would like to Mr. Hill to give us any last words, particularly on what you would change in response to Commissioner Roberts' question, if you had the power. Again, we have about 1 minute left. Apologies for the short time, but I wanted to make sure you got the last word as Jimmy Atchison's father.
Okay, thank you. And I thank everybody for being a part of this panel. You know, it's just time for everyone to wake up. It's time for a change. It's time to stop living in two Americas, because that's what it's about. I think a lot of Black police, and some just don't give a damn until it hits their house, to hit their doorsteps. I think some are afraid of repercussions. Like I say, it's just time for a change. It's time for people to wake up and see what's really happening and accept. It's time for a self-examination of each of us in America. Police brutality must be stopped. Police brutality, it continues to separate, tear apart the Black family in Black America, separate us. And it's just time to come together for all Americans to come together and stop police brutality. It must be stopped. It must end. And enough is enough.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hill. And I think we'll end there. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay, sorry, my screen froze. So we'll conclude there with the last word from Mr. Jimmy Hill, Jimmy Atchison's father. Thank you very much for your comments. Thank you, Attorney Griggs, for your testimony and your presentation. Thank you to our commissioners, Uwaifo and Roberts. This concludes the hearing of the case of Jimmy Atchison. We will now have a short break. Hearings will resume on the hour, which is 8 a.m. Here on the West Coast, 11 a.m. on the East Coast, with the case of Tamir Rice. And so we'll see you all again here shortly. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.